first and foremost, I think before we start, just to let you know who I am. I'm entrepreneur in residence at OpenUK. As I was saying in the other panel, I started my career in open source completely by chance. I sold books door to door. I managed to do okay with that, and then someone contacted me saying, "You just beat my sales record. Come and meet this guy called Mark Shuttleworth." And Mark Shuttleworth had an office in his front room, and he was creating this new thing called Ubuntu Linux. And I guess I joined when his office was still his front room, and I saw the whole growth of the Ubuntu community. I then joined MongoDB very early as a salesperson, and saw the MongoDB ecosystem grow. And then I got to know engineers pretty well, open source engineers, and someone created something called LXC, which became Docker, or went into it at least. That was amazing. Then Kubernetes was open source, and I was like, oh my gosh, this changes everything, and started a company around Kubernetes, created an open source project, and then was acquired a couple of years ago. So I'm privileged to be here with these two phenomenal people sitting next to me. Peter, do you want to maybe just quickly introduce yourself and talk about what you do?
Yeah, well, Peter Zaitsev, founder and until recently was CEO of Percona. And then I became smart and hired that lady to be their CEO instead. And I'm also involved in open source community overall, right, and some other infrastructure, open source infrastructure projects, right? For example, I'm a founder of FerretDB, which is better Mongo. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen you in and around the community for a long, long time, and I would say you have been an inspiration to a lot of us, including me. So thank you for all that you've done for open source. And we've also got Paula Kennedy. Paula, would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Paula Kennedy. I am COO and co-founder of a company called Syntasso. So we make Kratix. I was wearing my Kratix t-shirt yesterday, but today I'm wearing my Syntasso one. We make Kratix, which is an open source framework for building platforms. I have been in tech for 20 plus something years. I don't know how long, but I founded a company in 2012, which was also focused on Cloud Foundry, which was an open source platform as a service. And so have been in the open source community for what feels like a long time. And I'm an OpenUK ambassador and a team topologies advocate and a bunch of other stuff.
I think you're another one genuinely that was kind of inspirational. Although I didn't know you, I knew your brother. And it was Cloud Credo, I've got that right, yeah. And they created a service business around Cloud Foundry, which they then created a product set around and ended up exiting to Pivotal, am I right? And that journey, in the London scene at the time, for me, was just amazing to see someone do that, genuinely. And then there weren't that many people doing that type of thing. I mean, we had some incredible open source integrators like, OpenCredo, Equal Experts, and Kanos, and so on. But to see someone create a service company and then productize it and then exit was just, for me, was amazing to watch. So I guess given that we're wrapping up over the past couple of days, I thought maybe we could just start by asking and reflecting on what we've learned over the past day or two. What's been different or new, or what's come out of the past day or two that kind of made you think? Peter, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, what was interesting, Bruce Paris, I think was the interesting presentation. All right, I think it was kind of a little bit, clickbaity in terms of what I don't think what he suggests has a lot to do with open source, right? But I think that is an interesting, different way to, potentially reward the developers, right? Which has a very different approach, right, than open source fellows. But I think it's fantastic to see different approaches, right?
What did he refer to it as? It was post?
Yes, he called it like a post-open.
Post-open, yeah. Yeah, which reminded me a little bit of like maybe of an art movement where you've got to the end of one art movement and you're going to the next one. So maybe we're entering a post-open phase now. I mean, what that looks like and what ends up sort of actually being the markers of that, we don't quite know yet. But it does feel to me, having been in open source for this long, that we are entering a bit of a change now in the way that open source is. Would you like to give me your thoughts?
I was reflecting, the session I found really interesting yesterday was the panel on like business, the open source as a business, that the lovely Jen Riggins was moderating. It was really interesting and timely on the back of the announcement that Alexis Richardson made this week, where WeaveWorks sadly had to shut up shop, basically, because the business had kind of run out of money and closed down. And it's interesting. There was a lot of discussion on that panel. If you weren't there yesterday, I'd recommend the recording. It was really interesting. But there was a lot of discussion about, is open source a business model? And how do you do the best for everybody, where you're trying to give open source software to people who can benefit from it, but you also have to pay people? And how do you weigh up that tension? And I think that was really interesting. So your question about, like, what does the future of open source look like? It's a tough one. Right? Particularly when you're thinking about, people talked yesterday about the licensing changes that we've seen and how people are having to weigh up these things with money versus, free, and what's the world going to look like for open source? Who knows, right? What about you? What do you think?
We're actually talking about this on the last in the last panel, and I think the reasons for getting into open source, I believe, should stay the same. It's not about just being there to get paid or find a job. It's more the larger mission of trying to achieve something together. However, if we can work out ways to give some of that money and resource back in a way, which kind of plays to the themes that you've both talked about, it would benefit all of us. So how we do that, we're going to have to find that. We're going to have to work it out ourselves. But it feels like we're at that point where we need to definitely tackle it. Does anyone in the audience have any major takeaways from the past?
I wanted
Peter,
to say, I think just maybe add about this kind of my observation about the license change, right? I mean, I think in many cases you look at the companies, right, and I think we're kind of facing this kind of, what are you going to choose, right? Well, is it kind of heart attack or cancer? Well, let's choose cancer, because then we're not going to die today, right? But to me, that is often how that choice looks like, right? And I'm hoping what we will find the better choice for this company, so we don't have to really, abandon the open source in order to survive today.
That's quite the analogy.
Well, I mean, they all start about their OpenUK affiliation, right? Entrepreneur in chief, ambassador, troublemaker in chief.
Genuinely, is there anyone in the audience that would like to sort of reflect on anything they've learned over the past day or so before we... Nobody? Oh, here we go.
I'm going to have to go to my pictures, but I was listening to the new founder of Percona, actually, you'll be glad to hear. And I really like something that she said. We always hear about how, I'm using open source because it's less money. When, of course, we don't want to be less expensive. But what she said is that it's less money because the time to value of using open source is lower, and because the cost of development is lower. And I would also add to that maybe that the cost of innovation is lower, because I think that open source is an engine for innovation, and companies need that. And so getting that innovation for less is also. So I just love the way that she sort of thought about value.
That's a great point. Anything to add to that?
Anne is awesome.
Well made. So what do we think that the next year in open source is going to look like? I mean, when we sit here on the 2nd to 5th of February, like a good OpenUK sort of volunteer, sort of giving the date there. Where do we see open source this time next year? What do you think is going to have changed?
I'm interested to see how the Open Tofu project goes, right? Because that's almost like a test case that everyone's paying attention to. So for those who don't know, so the OpenTofu is kind of a fork from the HashiCorp Terraform open source project where HashiCorp have changed the license. And so now a group of people have come together from the community, although they're sort of backed by companies. They've done a fork OpenTofu, which is now, like the open source version of Terraform, I guess, with the same kind of license. So how that goes, how that plays out in the next 12 months is going to be super interesting. And I think a lot of people will be paying attention, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that's, if they're successful, that can be fantastic case study about this. Hey, you know what, if you're looking to change your license, think twice, right? Because, well, you may lose a lot of mind share if that happens. So yeah, that's, I think, fantastic.
But it's interesting, I thought in one of the plenaries yesterday, Stephen Augustus from Cisco, he talked about if your software is open source and then someone else takes it and adds something to the top of it and sort of differentiates, that's something that you need to be prepared for and you need to be better. So I'm kind of interested to see, like, if the OpenTofu fork and kind of Terraform, if they go different directions, but ends up that the Terraform, the HashiCorp version is better, like, that would be an interesting case study to see, right?
Oh yeah, but I think in this case, what I see a lot of things in open source is this kind of 80-20 rule, right? It's in this case, hey, you know what? You can argue, right, and talk to many people what Oracle is a pretty damn good database, right? And in many cases, it is better than than MySQL and Postgres, but it is, well, it's not better enough, right, to pay those kind of exorbitant prices, right, and pay for other things which comes with a vendor lock-in, right? So I think in this case, thinking about when we compare the open source and proprietary software, saying, oh, it is better, it's not enough.
That is maybe one interesting upshot of having fundamentally built your business on open source software. That Oracle, for example, if it got to a point where it was raising prices too much and customers didn't want to use it, they had no choice, right? They were going to have to pay more or face an incredibly lengthy and expensive way of getting out. HashiCorp making the change, but the code being open source means that it's led to OpenTofu, sort of springing into existence. I mean, when they did that, and I saw the name, I was like, no one's ever going to use that. Yeah. But genuinely, in the past few months, I've met a number of people who actually have, and I can't quite believe that. So I'm actually, and then being upstairs in the expo and seeing an OpenTofu stand and some people talking, I was like, wow, this is the power of the open source community coming through and defending the rights almost of like what it means to be open source. So that is kind of fascinating, and I think that to watch that play out, I think that's a really, really great point. So.
Yeah, well, and I would say what is also interesting here, and what that's maybe kind of like the case study, I think, not just HashiCorp, but also like Elastic and some other, is what you see is what those like venture-funded public companies, right, they're almost kind of like programmed to go that way, saying, hey, you know what, let us screw up a customer to extract more money from them. Right? There is no freaking other way for them, right? But that, as I think, is a great opportunity for what, let me call it like an indie entrepreneurs, right? Which actually can take another way and can focus on taking customer right, and being good, right? And that is, I think, that is a sustainable way to compete with those nasty corporate monsters.
Well, yeah, or actually thinking about it in another way, OpenTofu, I mean, no one's going to mind if people start creating a company around OpenTofu, making money from it. Maybe there's 10 to 15 companies that can make money from OpenTofu instead of it all going into the hands of one company that previously was HashiCorp with Terraform.
But then you've got the flip side, right? Like all those people from HashiCorp that have put in all that effort and IP and engineering, and they all need to get paid. And then you think, OpenTofu, is that going to mean, people lose jobs?
Well, but look, I mean, I think when you start with open source, right, you understand the benefit and drawbacks that come with that, right? On one extent, you have, this is kind of a massive leverage, right, in terms of adoption, on other hand, you also means that your IP is accessible to other people, right? And to me, it's like say, oh, but what about those people, right? They created that stuff, right? And they want to, get all that benefits, right? But kind of by having monopoly on adopting, monetizing that software, but not keeping an account of the value they got from open source and stuff, right? And in this case, look, I mean, we'll see how that becomes successful. Well, HashiCorp may also, I think in this case, be better HashiCorp in the long term than if OpenTofu wouldn't exist, right? And in our case, well, you know what? If they would end up, screwing up their customers, if this series of OpenTofu companies would be better, well, HashiCorp folks would go ahead and move to those companies, right? I think we can see that, for example, with PostgreSQL ecosystem. Amazon, Microsoft has become much more kind of focal point. You can see people moving from, enterprise DB or crunchy data to those cloud companies, and look, right, great engineers are going to get paid, right? You get the options.
So would anyone like to add to that discussion or ask another question around, reflect on maybe where we're going to be in another year's time? Mo, ask a question.
So a lot of learnings for me since yesterday and today, I think. And whether now or towards the end of the panel, and amongst the three of you, what do you think a recipe for success for someone who's starting with a new business? And I think business/project, pick what you need, in the light of companies creating great open source and having to shut down, companies creating open source and then has to change licensing to survive, and maybe powerhouses who are actually monetizing open source without necessarily having to contribute much. So there you go.
I'm going to hand this to the panel. Great question. Genuinely, I mean, it's quite difficult to answer, honestly. Today, if I was going to start a company, I think I'd be looking. I mean, it sounds maybe a little trite to say. I'd be looking at AI. I feel like it's going to be. I feel like it's going to be revolutionary. I feel like it's going to change the way that we think about coding. And I think that if you look at IT infrastructure, it is open source. I mean, AI pretty much is open source. And so there's going to be humongous opportunities in and around AI. I think the interesting thing about AI models to me is that there is no particularly good moat for the big guys. And that's been in a leaked memo from Google. We have no moat. I mean, even they recognize it. So I think it levels the playing field a little bit in a way that gives people opportunities that they may not have had for quite a while. So I don't know. Mo, if you're looking to do a startup, please don't leave the team. But I do think there's going to be opportunities for all of us somehow in AI, and I think we in this room are best placed to take advantage of it. So that's where I would be looking. No specific advice, but I think there's something in that's gonna give us great opportunity.
And the business model as well, I think, or the take on open source/business. So there is the domain.
Yes, that's the domain. The business model. Yeah.
I can try and talk a little bit to that. So I have just started a company, So I mentioned I did a startup in 2012 that Matt was talking about, Cloud Credo, and we exited that through acquisition, which was great. And now I'm on to my next startup, which we started when did we start it? 3 years ago? 3 years ago. We just had our third anniversary. But the framework we're building is open source. Right? So everything we have written, every line of code we have written up to now is available in GitHub. You could all go and download it. You could go do whatever the heck you want with it, right? What we are trying to do, the advice that we're trying to follow, I don't know if you saw Solomon Hykes, who started Docker. He gave a talk at KubeCon Chicago, the most recent one, on the cloud native startup track. And he talked about how, obviously, he didn't know what he'd got with Docker. When they first released Docker, it was a bit of a Hail Mary because the company was kind of Yeah, it was like on the brink of kind of collapse. They released Docker, and Docker like took off like a rocket ship. They didn't know what they had, right? So he talked about some of his lessons learned. And one thing he said was, it would have helped them if they'd had a monetization strategy at the start and not just gone ahead with the kind of the open source project and figured that out later. So that's what we're trying to do. So our software right now is open source, but we already have a view on, we think we have a view on, how we're going to monetize it, right? But the proof's in the pudding. So for us right now, it's trying to figure out what's the value driver. We get a lot of advice about finding the value driver. What's the thing that's adding the most value with our product that people will actually genuinely get benefit from and will pay good money for, right? Like it's not just selling it for the selling's sake. It's like we think we've got something that helps people, but what's the thing that's really going to add value for them? And then how do we monetize it in a way that isn't some sneaky license change or feeling like we're breaking this kind of social contract? What's a way that we say, the core is open free forever. This is the part that's really, really valuable, and you are getting value, so you pay that, and it's an open transaction between us. So that's kind of the model that we're trying to take. We're trying to be upfront about that from day one as well, so people don't feel, like with the HashiCorp example, people don't feel like maybe they've been betrayed or somehow there's a bait and switch or something like that. That's the approach we're trying to take.
Yeah, well, I mentioned something maybe about being a happy entrepreneur, right? Not just successful one, right? And I think what makes a lot of sense, right? If you can build a company in a space and around the idea what you're really passionate about, in a community which you like. Right, and I think that is kind of not always the case, right? I have seen entrepreneurs who can say, well, I thought that is a good business. I go out there, I kind of hate it every day, right? But I still do it because then I have that kind of fantastic exit and then I can retire by an island and wherever, right? And that is not a very good life to live, right, in this case. So I think that would be a comment.
And just reflecting on that, I think when I was thinking about your question as you were both speaking, it did kind of make me think, Paula, that when I started the open source project, I was like, I'll figure out the business model later. I'll just make the open source successful first. But that was a time 9-10 years ago when I'd seen companies make money in that sort of form. I think there wasn't that much of an understanding of business models and opportunities to make money around open source as there is today. So although in some ways it's a little bit more fraught and there's more minefields or banana skins to kind of avoid, I think there are people like us who've been through the process once, or in some cases twice, and lots of people in this conference where they've worked out what works and what doesn't. So I would highly recommend actually, building on what you said, Peter, working in an area that you really want to work in, and then bringing someone with the experience to be able to help you navigate that, because there's so many different business models in open source. So you kind of need to work out the one that's going to be right for you based on what you're trying to achieve. And I think there's enough knowledge now for us to be able to kind of give us a good steer on what that would be. We're not always going to get it right, but then not every startup is going to get it right. But I think we're going to be in a better position now than we were even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And the other thing I would say as well is that when people think about starting a company in open source, people just assume it's going to be a unicorn. It doesn't have to be a unicorn. It can be. I've done it. I've created a very sustainable, successful business purely off the back of services. And if I carried on at 15, 20 people and just focused on that, could have made an incredibly happy, sort of successful, financially secure life for myself for over a long term. So I think we automatically just assume it has to be some billion-dollar company in our space because so many people are using it, and that's what we see our peers do. It doesn't have to be the case. And we've been chasing unicorns for a long time, but as I'm learning, there are different types of companies, including camels and zebras. Yeah. Camels that can go across the desert for a long time with two humps and sustain themselves for a long time. Zebras, I've just forgotten. I don't know what they are, but.
Yeah. Yeah, well, what I think is very interesting about what you're saying, right, or maybe continue that. I think it's interesting, right, if you compare those kind of companies we hear about, right? I think you can compare those to rock stars, right? Hey, we hear about like a very few rock stars, but you know what? If you go into the music, right, your chance of becoming one is actually quite small, right? And the average musician is kind of struggling, right? Compared to becoming a dentist, well, not so sexy, right? But it probably is a very good living, right? And that is also kind of like a choice you are kind of making when you start the open source company, right? You can, be one or another. And I think it's also very interesting what you can see those days, right? It's at a time there is like a phenomenal amount of companies. They can, start and be acquired, or even kind of go to become public and continue with actually becoming profitable, right? This is kind of like even the, MongoDB, one of the most fantastic open source companies, right? Losing money, how many, more than a decade later, right? And I think there are some people which are very good to play this game, right? And that's kind of always, I guess, rah, right? And get your private and the public investors to continue putting money, right? And hey, you know what? They can have a lot of tremendous value created, right? I know it's not me. I believe in gravity, right? And I like actually good business, right? Which are, profitable.
I was just going to say, I was going to add to what you said earlier about the being a happy kind of entrepreneur. I had advice that said you shouldn't do a startup unless you are absolutely so passionate about the thing that you're going to start the business about that you absolutely can't do anything else apart from do your own company, right? Because I think, to your point, it is, you are doing it because you're passionate about it. You're doing it because you want to be in that community. And also it's hard. I was going to swear, but I won't swear. It's hard work. Like it's really, really hard. And you do hear about these rock stars that have these amazing unicorns and there's like huge exits or huge opportunities, but also there are so many that you don't hear about, to your point. Those that are steady, those that go under, like there's so many that you don't hear anything about. And it shouldn't be underestimated how hard it is to do a startup.
Yeah, I don't always often quote Elon Musk, but he did say that starting doing a startup is like eating glass, staring into the abyss, and sometimes it really can feel that. I think there's also like a business saying that some of you might have heard: revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. I also, thinking about the startup again, GitHub stars are vanity, profit is sanity. You need to be thinking about forget maybe the downloads, forget the user base at this point. Just focus like on the small scale, like what works and what makes money from the software that you're creating, and then think about scaling it from there. Whereas I think we've kind of got it the wrong way around for quite a while now. We've thought too much about the downloads and the community engagement without thinking so much about on the small scale. If I can get one person to give me £1 for one thing, then I've already proved that there's a business model there. So yeah.
Best money and customer money.
Yeah. Oh, we have gone a little bit over. We've got. Does everyone do you want to? Yeah, we'll do one more.
I just wanted to build on what you just said and ask a question. Like, giving all that you said, like, should we just do it backwards? Like, should we start a business with a closed source SaaS and not instead of being good and then become evil, but like the other way around, we're evil and suddenly when we made a profit, so like now it's out there in the open.
I honestly think you're on something. About 6 years ago, when I saw the way things were going with the license change, I thought we're going to go full circle here. Because I'm going to start my career doing pure open source, just looking at sort of downloads, Apache 2.0 GPL licenses, and then all of a sudden it's going to go around and we're going to end up with proprietary software again. And maybe we're at that point, genuinely. Maybe that's the answer to most questions. We start with a small proprietary product, we test it out locally with some, in London, I'm saying, or wherever you are based. You see if it works, and then you build, and then you start open sourcing like the other way around. Maybe you've just cracked all of open source business models for the next 10 years. Who knows? But that's a good point.
It is a good point. I mean, it's funny when you think about even Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes came out from Google, right? Google's making millions and billions of dollars, but then they open source Kubernetes, and then the huge industry that spun out of that. So you could definitely see a world where people make money first and then open source. I think for us, what we're trying to do is, I was talking to Mo earlier about it, is actually for our company, we're trying to do both things at the same time. We've got a view on monetization. We know how we want to make money from our open source software. And yet we still really care about being part of the open source community. That's why like we do the ambassador work, we do the community work, we show up at conferences to talk to people and help people. It's like not one or the other for us, it's both. That's what we're sort of aiming for.
Great.
Yeah, well, okay. Well,
Final word, Peter.
final word. Oh my gosh, so much pressure, so much pressure. Yeah, well, I think it's kind of an interesting question, right? To me, the open source in many cases acts as a sort of like a marketing multiplier, right? So the question, if you became successful, right, with let's say proprietary SaaS, and there are many successful proprietary SaaSes right out there. The question is, what would be your reason to open source, right? I think that is a very good say. What is there is a reason, right, why you want to do that, right? And especially in a business, you may not be able to do it just out of your own heart, unless that's your business, right? Because your VC is saying, hey guys, you just want to give the stuff away, right? Like, well, yeah. So I would be thinking about that, and I think there is a reason to do that, right? Like, for example, you mentioned Google and Kubernetes. That is not particularly, I would say, like as exactly SaaS thing, but Google needed a way kind of to deal with Amazon, right? Which is obviously dominating cloud, right? And the Kubernetes was a way to level a playing field. Like, I think it is a fantastic strategic move out there, which in the end helps Google to make more money.
I did say that you were going to get the last word, Peter, but sorry, I'm gonna just go because I work now for a proprietary software company, so a cybersecurity company that I was acquired by. We've actually had this conversation where obviously everything we sell is proprietary, except we have also a very successful open source project in Set Manager, which was acquired. JetSet was acquired, is now Venafi, but there are products in our product set that we sell as proprietary, where parts of that could be open source that would have a humongously positive impact on our ability to find a new distribution model, get new access to new leads, and then convert back. And I'm not sure that my company would do that because we just think in a very proprietary way. But genuinely, I do think there is possibly something in that because I know that you say, why would you do it? But Mo and I have talked about it. There are places I don't think we would do it, but maybe we would at some point. But there are those opportunities. They do exist, is what I just want to.
Yeah, but I think you're speaking about bits and pieces also, right? That is often different.
Yeah, but bits and pieces that would also provide enough value to want to convert.
I totally agree, right? But there is a lot of reason and like why people do. Yeah, that. Anyway, you see, I can't give him his last word.
And on that note, thank you so much for joining.